Hey friends, Michael here and welcome to another episode of Warrior Living TV. This episode, I'm going to show you how to survive family. I mean, you've been asking yourself that question of, somebody in my family, or it's me, or just in this time of having to be so close together, I'm feeling so frustrated, overwhelmed, and I just need something, or you're asking yourself those questions. I want to show you the best way for you to survive family and really thrive with your family. How do I do that? And what does that have to do with a guy and a hula hoop? So you've been asking yourself the question of how to survive family. And I mean, maybe you're in a situation right now where you're spending a lot more time with your family then, you wear off the honeymoon phase of it. Maybe you spent your time in that area of your life where you're just, I'm ready to go back to my schedule. Or maybe you're saying to yourself, I feel myself just, my expectations of what they should be doing and they're not doing it, and it's just leading to a lot of conflict and arguments. Whatever it is that you're feeling, I guarantee you every single person can get value from what I'm about to share with you today. So what does that have to do with this guy and a hula hoop? If you think about it, when we're working with family, it's about relationships, it's about being, it's about communicating. And so what do those essential components have to do with anything when we are not feeling good, when there's more arguments, there's more disagreements, when there's more feelings of frustration, overwhelm, stress? What's going on within these critical elements of communication? So what this is this is a little guy spinning a hula hoop. And what that hula hoop represents is this thing called personal boundaries. And I think we all have a different definition of what personal boundaries mean for each of us, because I'm going to share with you 4 categories in which people fall in their boundaries and how it leads to a lot of the conflict, the disagreement, the frustration, the overwhelm, the feeling like you're getting taken advantage of, the feeling like you don't listen, the feeling that, right, all these different things that come into the components of our own communication. So personal boundaries. What are personal boundaries? If we could get a sense for this, to just understand it for ourselves, a personal boundary would be a guideline or a rule or a limit that we set for ourselves and how we want other people to behave around us, or how we respond when they cross the line. And if this sounds familiar to you, I'll go a little bit more in depth. If this doesn't sound familiar to you, you're going to understand it with this little metaphor. But imagine this guy, he has this hula around us, and imagine this. We're going to explain the first category, which is someone who has soft boundaries. And so with them and their little boundary of the world, their boundaries are just so very fuzzy. You can barely see that, right? And that represents someone who has trouble, or has maybe not learned. Maybe they want to express their boundaries, but they find themselves merging into other people's boundaries. They find themselves taking other people's responsibilities. They find themselves at the end of the day really feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, feeling like let down. It can get overwhelming to have, for a person who has soft boundaries, because they're not communicating what it is that they want, what it is that they need. And when somebody crosses their boundary, they don't reinforce it. And so this person may feel a lot like a victim, like, they're always taken advantage of. They have the inability to say no, to fully express themselves. And so undefined. And they haven't really set down for themselves. And so if you're someone, this sounds familiar to you, one thing you can do is sit down with yourself and ask yourself, what do I want? How do I expect other people to behave around me? And if they cross a boundary, what do I want to happen? How do I want to respond? So as we begin to frame this out, I want you to identify, where do I fall into this category of personal boundaries? Because it's all about surviving in my family. It's all about thriving in my family. I guarantee you, when you get to this fourth area, you'll see what it means to thrive in your relationships. Because this doesn't just go for family, it goes for your spouse, your people at work, your boss, we're all relational creatures, so this learning definitely applies. 2 is our what we call, and this categories are just categories that I took off of a book, a book that was framed around relational thinking and how to set up boundaries. And so the second category is a person who has spongy boundaries, meaning that there's some things that they'll communicate about, and there's some things that just are kind of in the gray area. And so you can see that person's hula hoop has these missing parts. So some parts of their life they're able to fully express and say, you know what, I do not like it when you do this. I do not like it when you say this to me. And when somebody says it to them, they say, you know what, that I appreciate you if you do not say that again. I appreciate if you do not ever call me those names again. Right, they have to affirm that type of boundary, and so they become pretty strong in some areas, yet they still feel taken advantage of. They still feel unheard. They still feel like things aren't going quite as, the way that they want it to, because there's still these areas that are undefined. They still haven't sat down and taken that time to look at their life and to say, I'm feeling really frustrated in my career. Maybe if I, look at, what do I need to tell my coworker? Is there something that I'm not saying? Or maybe an area of your marriage. What is not being communicated? What ways do I need to change my approach? Right? And so again, going back to that, how do I sit down and tell this story of what are my boundaries, and creating time to communicate those boundaries. So this is all about, calls into the area of personal well-being, because at the end of the day, it's really about how we feel, right? What success feels, what fulfillment feels like, what going on to that next stage of your life, what that feels like. So number 3. Number 3 would be a person with our rigid boundaries. And this person has very firm boundaries. You know where they stand. So much to the point that they are shut off emotionally from, anybody ever getting close to them. They are so structured in their boundaries that, they find themselves frustrated with other people, frustrated with themselves on how people are not meeting their boundaries. And they communicate them, telling them, but maybe their expectations are so high that everybody else is just, failing to meet them, and they find themselves disappointed at the end of the day. Right, that person has these strong, rigid boundaries, and if, your most relationships will find as someone has a very rigid boundary and person is very, very soft boundary. And we find those in relationships where, both are struggling to, feel well, to feel good, to feel like they could take it on to that next level for themselves. And so when we look at the boundaries, where do you fall in this category? We'll give you number 4. And number 4 is where we want to practice being at. Because number 4 is all about how can we be at a level of flexibility with our boundaries. Flexibility means that, and I'm going to erase this boundary right here. Flexibility means that I honor, I honor what my boundaries are. I honor those things that are important to me. And I honor them so much that I communicate them because they are important to me. And if I'm going to communicate them to those people in my life that mean so much to me and are very important to me, then it is my duty to communicate them. However, I also understand that there are people who have different boundaries that they've established. Right? Personal boundaries are really built from beliefs, opinions, attitudes, and that really forms the foundation of really what a boundary is. And so most of it comes from, right, our social learning. If I grow up in a, which I grew up in a household not having my father there and having my mom who would fall into the category of being a person with very soft boundaries. And so, you know, a person who says yes all the time, has trouble saying no, has trouble communicating those boundaries. That's what was modeled to me. So where do you think I fall into this category when it comes to how I've come to learn setting boundaries? Right? I fall into the soft boundaries to moving into spongy boundaries, and then now trying to work on flexible boundaries. I was never that person who had very rigid boundaries. But you know, for me, that was my journey. And so you look at your journey. How were you modeled how to behave when it came to interacting with other people? Right now, we have 2 little girls, and we're all about teaching them these boundaries. And right, it comes through communication. For most of us, we think that, well, they should understand. They should know me by now. They've been with me long enough. Why don't they understand, who I am and what am I about? Right? We ask ourselves those questions, and those questions come right back at us and say, it's your responsibility to do that for yourself. So when we look at this structure here, we're taking a look at how have I learned through social learning. What is appropriate and inappropriate? What am I comfortable doing and not comfortable doing? Right? If you're up here having very soft boundaries, it's very uncomfortable for you to establish and be strong and firm and rigid with a boundary. And if you're someone who's very rigid, just grew up with this very rigid belief system structure and how other people should interact with you, now it's very challenging and uncomfortable for you to let down some of those walls and to give your trust to other people that they can do things in your life, that they can help, that they can boost you up, right? So right here is what we call this middle range, which is flexibility. And communication experts say that there is no such thing as bad or miscommunication. There's no such thing as resistance, what we like to say in the counseling field. There's no such thing as resistance. We think, that kid who has resistance to me and, they don't like me, or, there's no such thing as resistance, only an inflexible communicator. Let me say that again. No such thing as resistance, only an inflexible communicator. So that puts responsibility back 100% on you, saying that if you are not getting the results you want in your relationships, you are 100% responsible in changing your approach and how you're communicating. And so this starts with skill building, right? This is skill building, but this again comes down to our mindset that we have around relationships, saying that it is possible for you to achieve whatever you want in a relationship. However, you're going to have to get to a point where you accept responsibility that you play 100% role in saying what you want to say, not saying what you want to say, and really becoming aware of the choices that you're making when it comes to boundaries, right? Person who's a soft boundaries, they don't express what they need to express. Whether it's a fear of conflict, whether it's a fear of others' opinions, whether it's a fear of, how things are going to change, that person is not expressing what they need to express. And so they remain very incongruent with who they think they should be. So when we're learning this process of boundaries, it all comes down to how to thrive in your family. And I guarantee you, the best families right here, the best marriages in the world, the best working relationships, the best teams have these flexible boundaries. They've learned to communicate their boundaries, yet they've learned to work with people to the point where, sometimes they have to establish a boundary. That's what I call establishing a boundary, right? That first circle. That first circle represents establishing a boundary. This is important to me, and so therefore I am going to spend my time doing it during this part of the day. Now when someone crosses that line and says, nope, we can't do that, we're going to do this instead, now the second part of a boundary is reinforcing that boundary. So that second line represents, you have to, most people can get to that point of establishing a boundary and talking about what is important to them. However, most people it just doesn't happen. They get stuck with, why do I have to say it again? I already said it one time. Why couldn't you hear that? But repetition, right? We have to stand our ground. If your family is important to you, if your relationships are important for you, you will do this, because not only is it going to protect your well-being, right? Not only is it going to protect your well-being, but it's going to protect the relationship as a whole. And those people in your life who mean so much to you, who you would give your life for, really, how are you being with them? Do they know what you're about? Do they know who you want to be? Do they know the things that are important to you? Do they know where you're going? And we can start asking yourself those questions around your family and how you want things to be. You then start creating momentum. And just like how, I don't know if you know how success works, but success, just like an ice cream cone, a triple scoop ice cream cone, one scoop, first success, second scoop, second success, third success. Anybody going in any particular direction always need the wheels of momentum to start, and that starts with that first little success. Second success is built upon success. And so if this is an area of your life that you find yourself struggling with or just need new information, it starts with stepping outside this zone of comfort and building just a little bit of success. You know what? Maybe today, here's your challenge. Can you identify some person in your life who you need to express these boundaries with? Can you identify someone in your life who you need to talk about your boundaries with? Whether you need to communicate and reinforce them, which is right here, or whether you need to sit down and say, you know what, I've been too rigid in my thinking. Maybe what you have to say can work, and maybe we can work together on creating this I understand now that I've been way too strong and being stubborn in how I'm thinking about this. Maybe I need to change. Right, so my challenge for you is to find someone in your family, in your relational family, whether that's friends, workers, co-workers, immediate family, and create space for it. Create space saying simply as, I need to talk to you right now. Can we have this quick little session? And what will it do for me? So that's what we got. Please, if you have any questions, put it below in the comment section. And in this little teaching, it's always about what I like to come back to. As you listening, you have the power, capability, learning, of course, it's all built within us. You have the capacity to grow beyond your circumstances. That's it for me. Warriors, this week, grow beyond your circumstances.